the economy will suffer as a result of general lockdown in economic activity. Nigeria is not an exception to the countries that are going through the economic implications of the coronavirus pandemic. Unfortunately for us as a country, our economy was already in a fragile state before the coronavirus epidemic or pandemic, as they call it. So we are coming from a very weak position at a time when we ordinarily are struggling to balance our balance of payment or our budget. And then we are now hit by a crisis that has multiple economic implications. For instance, our major export earnings, crude, is currently trading around $20 per barrel. And at the time when our reserve had dropped to just barely above $3 billion. At the same time, we can't even find market for our crude production. So it's like a double whammy for the country because we don't have the reserve. At the same time, our foreign exchange has declined precipitously. Foreign portfolio investment has dried up. And in terms of even local funding, we had actually been running hugely deficit budget. So we don't have even the local currency reserve to provide stimulus packages and also provide some level of cushion to the citizens. And that's why it looks like the economic impact from Nigeria is going to be more severe than a lot of the countries that have been impacted by the coronavirus crisis.
Now, if I may ask you, Mr. Chukwu, what are, in a few words, what are the key points of an economic crisis, especially as it relates to Nigeria at this time?
Well, the first thing is that you're going to see low level of production or productivity. You're going to see negative balance of payments. You're going to see higher level of unemployment as a result of low level of productive activities. And then you may see high rate of inflation. And for a country like ours, the implications are more severe to the extent that you may see situations where some state government will not be able to pay salaries, and that will worsen the level of unemployment, heighten the lower level of consumption, which have direct impact on production. So if you're not careful, you will certainly move from a point of economic recession to a point of depression, economic depression. That's the concern that we have, that the policy makers of this country and the bureaucracy should ensure that what we're going to witness will be a temporary blip to economic growth, which will be a recession, and it shouldn't be allowed to fester into a depression.
Now, if I may ask you, sir, considering the gloomy picture that you have just painted, and considering the fact that the economy is almost completely frozen at this point in time, as almost all activities have stopped, how long can a country like ours handle such an economic standstill?
You lost me? Can you still hear me?
I can. You're good to go, sir.
Okay. It depends on how quickly we respond, the policies we come up with. In terms of lockdown, for a fragile economy, for an economy that depends, 89% of the economic activities are driven by small and medium-scale enterprises that live by the day. We really can't afford more than 2 to 4 weeks of lockdown because most Nigerians do not have the financial reserve to sustain their livelihood in the absence of engaging in economic activities. So if you allow the lockdown to fester or to be prolonged, you may realize that you will witness people dying of hunger because they can no longer fend for themselves. So in terms of our staying capacity, staying ability in a lockdown, I do not think Nigerians have more than 1 month of staying ability in a lockdown. Then the other aspect of your question really relates to how quickly can we rebuild the economy and resume growth. It will all depend on the policies we take or the policies that the government drives. The first thing that I mentioned earlier, we don't have the economic reserve that other countries like Germany will have to stimulate the economy back to life. So that means we have to depend on external economic stimulus, which may also explain why the government had approved the IMF for a $3.4 billion loan, which had just been recently approved. They have also come back to the National Assembly to seek for 850 billion naira loan to finance the budget, particularly the capital expenditure component of the budget. So all of this will depend on how these resources are deployed. If we deploy the resources in infrastructure development, we're going to have two prone benefits. One is that if you create employment and therefore inject liquidity into the hands of average consumers who can resume consumption, and the consumption will stimulate production, and then you could have an improved level of economic activity. But if the borrowings are channeled towards allocation, for instance, the 3.4 billion is used to disburse allocation to the state and federal government, and this money is spent on payment of government overhead and salaries and wages, then you may find minimal impact of that on the economy. And ultimately, you will have a prolonged economic recession or possibly depression, and which is one of the things we are saying, look, now that you have assessed the $3.4 billion, which is payable within the next 5 years, you must make sure that you use it to stimulate economic growth so that earnings from or improved economic growth will lead to revenues of government and enhance the capacity of government to pay back the 3.4 billion, because we have to pay back that loan in the next 5 years.
Now, considering the fact that Nigeria is already indebted and we continue to service debt, I mean, do you see this actually changing the economy? And one question on the minds of our viewers, are there any other factors that will help us to recover from this crisis beyond the IMF loan?
Yes, certainly. There are other factors, but let's take the first part of your question. Will the 3.4 billion help us to recover? Like I did mention, it depends on how we deploy it. Yes, we are highly indebted, but we're also in a situation where we cannot but look for an external funding source because we don't have the reserve. I mean, we missed the train when we should have joined earlier. But now the next year there was an express train that passed our route, but we missed it. Now we are left with the local train, so we must join it if we have to move to the next destination. So that's a fact of life as it stands today. But the reality for us is that despite our high interest payment obligation in terms of revenue, you know what? When you talk of Nigeria's indebtedness, it's not necessarily a result of debt to GDP ratio. It's more of debt service to revenue, which is quite high. We are almost approaching. We are actually exceeded more than 50% of our revenue using it to service our debt. And but unfortunately, we are now left with no option, because if you look at the impact of the COVID-19 on the economy, for instance, I'll give you some classical examples. Currently, our reserves have dropped about $33 billion. Foreign correspondent banks are finding it difficult to confirm Nigerian letters of credit issued by Nigerian banks without cash collateral. So you really can't allow that. If you allow that to continue, it simply means we won't be able to import some basic raw materials and equipment that we need to have the industries working, which means we're going to move from frying pan to fire. So we are, what else can we do apart from borrowing to fund our balance of payment deficits and also fund some of the capital expenditure? There are a couple of things we should do. My starting point is that we need to rejig our bureaucracy. The government, this is an opportunity for the government to come boldly to the citizens and say, look, we really cannot continue to run this over-bloated bureaucracy. Today, if you look at the 2020 budget, the government had made provision for 3 trillion naira as personnel cost. And then there's a 2.45 trillion naira for debt service. So the debt service, I assume you can't do much about it. But what of the personnel cost of 3 trillion naira? Right. Do we need to have this number of employees working for the government? Most countries are pushing towards a slim government where you have very few people working for government and the rest are working for the private sector. But unfortunately, what we have witnessed is that we keep expanding the bureaucracy and therefore increasing the government overhead. The second aspect is that the issue of there are some expenditures of the government that are avoidable. For instance, the issue of petroleum subsidy. The government is currently saying that they don't have subsidy, but what happens if the crude oil price moves up? As long as you have a regulated market price and the government is the one fixing the price and you're doing price modulation, and you also have to bridge by ensuring that same price applies across the country, then there is a subsidy. It's not the government bearing the subsidy or consumers in some parts of the country are bearing the subsidy. So the question is that must we continue to do that? Again, if you continue with the price modulation, you're not able to attract capital that you need to build the refineries and localize the refining activity in the country. If we localize refining activity in the country, we're going to reduce the amount we're spending, foreign exchange we're spending on importation of refined petroleum products. That will go a long way to conserve the little that we have in terms of foreign reserves. Okay, that's one other thing. The other thing I think we should also look at is that we need to allow private sector to invest in infrastructure. We have toyed with a few of these projects, but as it stands today, it has become clearly imperative that we bring in private capital into infrastructure because the government cannot fund infrastructure from budget allocation. We are talking about the government struggling to even pay salaries and wages, pay rent overhead, pay interest on existing loans. So, given the paucity of government revenue, the approach I think we should adopt is to identify commercially viable infrastructure projects, give them concessions to private sector investors who can build those infrastructure projects, and then ultimately pay taxes to the government. The infrastructure will still be available to Nigerians to use. I've always used the example. I would rather pay for a toll road from Ikeja to VI and drive that route, which is about 30 kilometers, in 20 minutes than to drive free on that route and drive it for 2 or 3 hours. So we need to bring in private capital to be, and that will free up a lot of resources. Currently, the government is struggling to borrow money for infrastructure. I think if we do those things, we're going to change the shape of this economy and then make it attractive and also as well as stimulate faster economic growth.
So finally, because from your analysis, it seems Nigeria is ill-equipped to actually handle this situation. So if I may ask you, do you feel more optimistic or pessimistic? Do you think the efforts in recent days, especially by the federal government, is sufficient or is it moving in the right direction?
What I would say is that it looks like the economic conditions of the country or the situation of the country will compel the government to begin to take the right decisions. The issue of introducing price modulation on refined petroleum products is one of them. But like I said, I think they need to go the whole hog and liberalize the price of PMS and allow private sector investors to come into that market and build refineries. They just gone halfway. They need to go the full course. I also believe that by the time the government realizes that they cannot fund infrastructure, even maintain existing infrastructure, it might be compelled, it will be compelled to consider bringing in private sector investors to maintain existing infrastructure as well as build new infrastructure. So I think, like they say, that necessity is a mother of invention. We, as a country, will be pushed by economic difficulties to take the right decision.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. We appreciate your insightful analysis as far as this issue is concerned. We hope to get back to you as events unfold in the coming days.
My pleasure, and thank you once again for having me.
Please stay safe. Thank you, sir.
Okay.